Welcome to the Conversation Lab. I'm Don Schaefer. If democracy begins in conversation, then we need to nurture a culture where ordinary people like us routinely talk about those things that help us understand each other, whether it's about climate, race, religion, gender, or politics. When we're trying to make sense of our city and the world we live in, every question comes with a set of assumptions about the nature of ourselves and our place in a larger world. The Conversation Lab provides a safe place to talk about some of those things. This program is produced by CFRO-FM in Vancouver. It's available on air and online on various platforms, and we appreciate the help of Vancouver's community groups. Today we have Sara Harris, who's a professor of teaching in the Department of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at UBC. She's a 3M National Teaching Fellow, and she has a PhD in oceanography from Oregon State University. Sara's fields include climate science, climate change, oceanography, paleoceanography, paleoclimate, environmental science, science education, and most recently, she focuses her research on how people learn climate science. She's published many articles, co-authored Understanding Climate Change, Science, Policy, and Practice with Sarah Birch, and she started a really neat online course all about climate change. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
It's a fun thing to be doing.
The thing that struck me when I was reading your credentials was that you call yourself a professor of teaching, which is unusual. It's a nice compliment, but it's an older, worldly title that doesn't get used much. I mean, I know there's a distinction between professors of teaching and professors of psychology or pick a discipline. So why do you highlight that?
I think that's a funny question because it's actually my official title at UBC. So there are about 30 of us who are professors of teaching, and we have a particular mandate where part of our job is to do work that has impact on teaching and learning beyond our own classroom. And so there are lots of different ways in which we could do that, and peer-reviewed research is one of those, right? I could do research in education and publish that in the peer-reviewed literature, which is the standard way of communicating with people if you're doing research. But I can also do things like write a book for a more general audience or create this online course that's free for anybody across the world. Or I could give workshops and help other faculty members work on bringing evidence-based pedagogies into their classroom. So I really like it because it gives me such a diversity of ways in which I can contribute. But it actually is just a title at UBC. It's a fairly recent one. There are probably about 150 faculty members who are on that career track at the university. And that's
Is it a tenured position?
It's a tenured position.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, it's intended to be people who come from a disciplinary background but are focused on teaching in that area.
It's interesting talking to other professors. And when I've asked them this question, they've said, well, most of us weren't taught how to teach. We're professors of a particular discipline, but we understand the discipline, but we don't necessarily know how to teach, which is I guess is vulnerable, but a nice compliment to being a professor of teaching.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that people who teach at universities don't have training in teaching, though I think that's changing now, which I think is a huge positive step. So graduate students, for example, at UBC now have many more opportunities during their graduate training or even their postdoctoral work to participate in teaching and to work with people who are professionals in how to teach well and what is the evidence that we have about how people learn and what kinds of pedagogies work to help people learn science. What kinds of pedagogical content knowledge do you need to have? Like, you don't just need to know your discipline, but you need to know how other people think about your discipline. And maybe your students think about it in ways that you haven't thought about it for 20 years and you've forgotten. So there's a lot to being an expert teacher in a field that we typically haven't trained university professors to do. But I'm really hopeful that over the course of about a generation, we could change that, right? As we train graduate students, they can go off in the world, go to other places, and they're taking their pedagogical training with them in addition to their research training and their primary focus.
I'm curious about are you technically a scientist or a teacher or both?
Oh, I'm both for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. My training is in science research and basic science research and paleoceanography and looking at marine sediments to try to extract information about how the climate changed in the past. That's what I did as a graduate student and a little bit beyond. But shortly after graduate school, I actually went and taught at in a small nonprofit organization called Sea Education Association, which is in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And I don't know if you've heard of Woods Hole, but
I have.
It's it's crawling with scientists, right? And it's particularly crawling with oceanographers because there are many organizations there that are dealing with oceanography in different ways. But the one that I worked at was a terrific place. What we did was we took undergraduates out to sea and did research with them. And it was a combination of learning to sail and navigate. The boats that we were on that the organization owns are like 40-meter sailing schooners plus oceanographic research equipped vessels. And so I was out there as a scientist doing research with undergraduates. And that was my first job out of graduate school. And it really took me in a different direction into how to help other people understand how to think like a scientist. And then I moved on to UBC from there.
And here you are.
Here I am in Vancouver. Yeah.
What prompted the book, Understanding Climate Change?
Well, actually, Sarah Birch, I should give her credit for that because she is a person who's deeply involved in issues around policy and governance that have to do with climate change. She was interested in writing this book, and someone had suggested that she contact me. So we got in touch, and I wanted to help her and be part of that project. And so we collaborated on the book, and we really wanted to be able to integrate the science and the sort of basic controls on the climate system and align those with the mitigation options that we have available to us. Because there are sometimes misunderstandings about what we can do, right? So we want to make it clear that the things that we're going to do to mitigate climate change have to be aligned with how energy flows in the climate system. So, for example...
explain.
Yeah, for example, there are lots of environmentally friendly things we can do that aren't related to addressing the climate problem. Like we can pick up litter on the street, right? And that's an environmentally friendly thing to do. Maybe it's going to keep pollution out of the waterways. But it's not going to address climate change, right? So let's align our actions with things that'll deal with energy flows. Let's align our actions with, for example, dealing with greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, or looking at reflection and different ways that we can different things we can do to mitigate with reflection. So yeah, it's just to try to be clear about actions that deal with climate change and separate those from just environmentally friendly actions for other reasons.
In our studios is Sara Harris, who co-wrote the book Understanding Climate Change, Science, Policy, and Practice with Sarah Birch. What were the goals of the book?
Yeah, well, we really wanted to create a resource for people that gave them a solid foundation in the climate science, and also we were able to give them an opportunity to see how policy and governance would align with addressing climate change. So we didn't see that there was a book out there that did that. There are lots of climate science books that are focused really on understanding the physics of the climate system, pretty much. And there are books on policy and governance. And we wanted to integrate those two things. We wanted to make it possible for example, teachers to use a book where maybe that teacher's focus really is on policy and governance, but it was really important for the students to get a grounding in the science as well, because you can't really talk very well about dealing with a problem if you don't have a strong foundation in the problem. And we also saw it as an opportunity for scientists could use that book as well, with a focus on the science and go more in depth in that area, but also bring in policy issues that really provide relevance and an authentic reason to be studying this kind of science.
You said in the book that there were three fundamentals. One was the basics of climate change. The second was to interweave human response and solutions with mitigation and adaptation, and the third was the lens of a transformative change. All deep topics. The fundamentals, I think, do you think that the world understands the fundamentals enough of what's going on?
That's a really good question, right? So, probably that's one possible answer that, how much do you need to know? Do you need to know the intricacies of how the climate system works to perceive risk and to gain a sense of urgency about action? How much do you need to know?
Well, the question, put that in a graphic and current context. How many more earthquakes and hurricanes do we have to get before we connect the dots?
Yeah, well, I think that the dots are connected. It's a matter of whether or not people see that connection and then can make the link to intention to act and make the link then to action. The hurricanes right now, it's such a timely topic to discuss because, if we have a warmer baseline in the world, then that is more energy in the ocean, and that energy is fueling those storms. And wow, there's a lot of destruction and a lot of disruption and a lot of chaos. And now lots of instability for probably a long time for lots of people. So it's interesting. The responses that people have sometimes to actually living through an event like that, and I personally have not lived through such an event, but often the response that you hear is, well, we're gonna rebuild bigger and better here on this place that we value. And it's an interesting response because you're not going to take the Caribbean out of the tracks of hurricanes, right? You're not going to take South Florida out of the tracks of hurricanes. Mm-hmm. So could we change that conversation and decide that we're going to actually evaluate what we really should do in the future, right? These hurricanes have now destroyed a lot. How should we respond so that we can actually count on in the future having less disruption the next time a hurricane comes through? Making the links between these weather events, these extreme weather events, and climate, I think that information is out there, right? So there are more extreme events that are happening with greater frequency than before. The baseline has just shifted, right? We're seeing more floods, more high intensity floods, more forest fires, right? Like we had our worst forest fire season in BC this year. More intense droughts, longer droughts, heat waves, all these kinds of things have become documented. We have evidence that they've become more frequent. So, what are our responses going to be? It's interesting. We do need to kind of raise the level where talking about climate change and responding to climate change becomes the norm, and it's just this is part of the way we operate, right? And that it's in the political arena, and we need to figure out our political solutions to it.
I guess the question that comes to mind for me is: are we in denial, or are overwhelmed, or are we ready to have those conversations? You mentioned in your book that we do talk about this around the dinner table, and some of us do, and some of us don't. And the idea that are we prepared to have the bigger conversations about not just rebuilding in the Caribbean, but doing something different?
Yeah, when you say are we ready? Certainly, some people are ready, and some people are not ready, and the places where we can have real impact are at the government level, right? And so we there needs to be pressure, political pressure on governments to really take a look and address what we have to do. Is it changing building regulations? Is it changing putting money into infrastructure for the future? Puerto Rico is now without power, right? And who knows how long it's going to be until they get power back. So I think the keys are probably going to be in pressuring the government, and that then gets into a whole complicated rat's nest of how our political system works. Both here and say in the United States.
It's interesting. Can we change? Will we change? I think Al Gore asked those questions in a couple of different ways. Roy Scranton talks about learning to